Alright, y'all, welcome back to a whole nother video with your boy Fanzo Chery, and I'm excited to do this reaction. But you know, it's the 7-minute challenge, so it's either it can convince me, it can captivate me, or give me the or we're gonna go ahead and skip this entire video. But it's one atheist versus 25 Christians. Let's get into it.
Could there be a purpose to
Starting
it?
the timer now.
Israel.
I'm not saying the scribe made something up. I'm saying the scribe has a command.
So where did they get that command from?
From God.
I had Jesus appear to me 3 years ago.
I don't know what's happening there. I have to suspect it's some kind of psychological phenomenon. Hi, my name's Alex O'Connor. I'm an atheist and host of the...
Hold on, guys. Hold on. I gotta let y'all know about the time that I tried to evangelize. This was back in middle school. No, not middle school. Freshman year of high school. And I tried to convince one of my friends that was an atheist. And this was like early on in my walk with Christ, so I wasn't as strong as I am now. But I was trying to convince him. Every day on the bus to going to school, I would literally just read out scriptures. I would literally just ask him like, hey man, like, what do you do at home? What's your interaction with God at home? Do you have a connection? And he was the guy that just like was super smart. Like he was one of those kids that was in all the AP classes, and he was just so intelligent. And I feel like with a lot of smart people, like they can't really comprehend faith, and they can't comprehend something that they can't physically interact with, right? So like I felt like that was like his thing. Like he couldn't comprehend it. And I remember like this was going on for months trying to convince him, and I was just like, you know what, just forget it. So the last time I tried, like the last thing I did to try to convince him is I got one of those little mini Bibles, and I told him, you know what, bro, I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, but just go ahead and read the Bible. And I just gave it to him, and I don't know if he realized who and what God is and how he died for us, but I hope if you're watching this, bro, like if you're a believer, man, God is good. But if not, bro, God is still good. And I hope someone or a pull on your life brings you to Christ. He's not gone, he's not missing, he's right next to you. But other than that, let's go back into this video.
Within Reason podcast, and today I'm surrounded by 25 Christians who, God willing, might be able to change my mind. My first claim is that suffering makes God's existence unlikely.
Free will, sin.
Good work.
Hey, how's it going?
How's it going? Nice to meet you.
Sage. Why don't you just begin? Why is suffering or evil make God's existence unlikely?
I think when confronted with two hypotheses, so atheism, naturalism, or theism, we should ask what we expect would occur under either hypothesis. And then we look at the world and we see what does actually occur. And what do we find? We find, I think most relevant here, a system of natural selection, the mechanism by which God apparently chose to bring animals and ultimately human beings into existence.
I'm not trying to make fun of him, but he talks like a computer. If you know, you know. Just comment down below, like, am I tweaking? If I'm tripping, doesn't he sound like a computer?
Into existence. A system which is defined by suffering. Survival of the fittest is the same thing as the death and suffering and destruction of the unfit. I'm told that the very mechanism that God chose to bring about the human species as the ultimate end of his creation was one that is imbued with suffering, such that 99.9% of all the species, let alone animals, that have ever existed on planet Earth have been brutally wiped from existence into extinction. And I think that that's less likely on theism. If you assume atheism or materialism, not only do you explain this, you also come to expect it.
What is your, I guess, epistemology? How do you know that this is the case, that it's less likely, and that, you know, an atheist worldview, a naturalistic worldview would look like the way it is today?
Of course we don't know, but that's why I use the phraseology of unlikely. I think that if you were to tell somebody who was sort of in some Rawlsian state of nature, hadn't seen the world, and you said that the world has been created by an omnibenevolent, all-powerful God, what kind of world would that person be imagining? And if you dropped them into the world, if you were given the opportunity to become a wild animal, like in 2 seconds, I was just going to turn you into a random wild animal somewhere on planet Earth.
I like being a guy.
I think you'd probably kill yourself before I had the opportunity, because you know that the life of these animals is almost defined in terms of their suffering.
I guess I just don't really see how you can justify that claim per se. What I would say is that if we actually take into account the holistic view of the scriptures, which I do think that you have to do, we see that it's actually much more coherent once you acknowledge that evil itself doesn't have ontology. Evil's not a thing. You don't look under a rock and say, there's the evil, right?
Fine by
And
me.
so
I'm not really talking about evil here, because that's, of course, a moral term. I'm talking about suffering.
can you distinctualize suffering and evil?
So evil is a moral term. Evil means that something is bad, it's immoral. You need to have a moral ontology for that. Suffering is just any experience that's not wanted when experienced, right? And so even if you don't have a moral objectivism, you can still say that suffering exists. So here's a question. A deer gets its leg caught under the branch of a tree that's fallen over in the wild, and it starves to death in confused agony. Why does God oversee this? And why does God set the natural world up such that events like this occur?
Well, because the ultimate view here is that
Okay, pause.
Nice to meet you.
We pausing on this ad.
Good work.
how's it, man?
How's it going? Nice to meet you.
Okay, so my first question to start out with is what exactly about suffering makes this unlikely on the condition that God exists?
I think that if God is all loving, then he probably wouldn't want his creatures to suffer. And so I think that the fact that they do suffer makes his existence less likely.
Okay, perfect. And is there some specific aspect of suffering that you're particularly honing in on,
Yeah.
horrendous, or
In
whatever that is?
particular, non-human animal suffering. Because I think that the Christianity has a celebrated tradition of theodicies trying to explain why suffering exists.
Yeah.
Human free will, the development of the soul, higher order goods, all
I
of this
did
kind
say
of
that,
stuff.
yeah.
None of which apply to the suffering of non-human animals.
Have you heard of the axiological expectation mismatch problem?
I have not.
Okay, so philosophers of religion have started to understand that the thing that actually generates a problem between God and suffering is actually the value system you attach to the very attribute of perfect lovingness. Because the problem of evil is an internal critique, you have to look at a very specific version of theism and how it defines perfect lovingness. I want to present to you a version where my version of perfect lovingness does not actually constitute a problem and a misalignment, that mismatch between the suffering of animals, just to say the profusion of suffering of animals,
Right.
and the existence of God.
So let's go. What kind of God are we imagining that would allow and oversee and do nothing to prevent billions of years of untold animal suffering?
Right, so you're talking about non-prevention.
Or setting up the system that is natural selection, such that that it relies upon things like predation and disease.
Well, the first part is I don't agree with the whole setting up the system part. So I'm not one of those theists that believes that God does this select and pick idea of creating worlds. I don't think that God actually creates worlds. I think that God lets worlds develop according in a certain way, but because God can oversee an overarching narrative, he knows exactly how he can redeem anything. The first time, sorry, go ahead.
Could God have made it such that animals were all herbivores instead of carnivores and omnivores?
Yes, he could totally do that.
Okay, so had he done that, here's an instant way to reduce by orders of magnitude the amount of suffering that exists.
Right.
Bro came ready. Like, he came ready. I never heard that term before, but he came ready, and that blew me out the water. But now they're kind of like deviating from the conversation. But this is what happens when you debate. Like, it just gets crazy.
But hold on. That's particularly assuming a value theory already that I haven't told you I'm adopting that has a problem with the evil. So I have to give you my value theory first for you to show that misalignment.
Okay, let's hear it.
Perfect. Okay, so my value theory says that it's not the most important thing about a sentient creature is not what merely happens to them. It's about the total timeline of their life and how and where their life permanently ends. Meaning, if you were to judge an author of a narrative, and the first few chapters, let's say, there's a lot of bad things happening, but the end ends with this crescendo where there's victoriousness, there's redemption, there's beauty, and everyone in the story actually endorses their entire existence that they live. They can look at their they can look at the total timeline, and they actually each subjectively come to the conclusion, I'm glad I was made, and I totally see what my suffering was for. That's the particular I'm using with. So we have to judge, like John Hicks says, we have to judge the very nature of God's lovingness by what he does in the end, not these few time slices that we observe right now. For you to show that there's a problem, you have to show to me that the suffering of animals cannot be transformed, are intrinsically cut off from being transformed into a life that they will endorse. There's a couple of theses on the table,
Okay.
but sure, go ahead.
Okay, so are you talking about the end of their life is in their end of life on Earth, or are you talking about the afterlife?
I'm antemortem, postmortem.
Okay, because if you're just talking about life on Earth, then I would say that if you had an author writing a book and a character, if we were trying to figure out the relationship between that author and the person.
7 minutes is done. I really think this captivated me. It got a hold of me, and it got me thinking about just how atheist thinking, the way that we kind of come at it as a Christ follower, and it's interesting. I would watch more of this. If you agree, let me know in the comments below. If you disagree, let me know as well. But with that being said, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.